Good morning. I would like to call this meeting to order. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Revenue. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Senator Doñate,
Here.
Senator Neal, Senator Sievers-Gansert,
Here.
Assemblywoman Considine,
Present.
Assemblyman Hafen, Assemblyman Orentlicker,
Here.
Assemblyman Urick,
Here.
and Chair Bacchus.
Present. And please mark our other members present as they arrive. We do have quorum, so we can go ahead and open this meeting. We will move on to agenda item 2, which is opening remarks. I would like to welcome our audience and committee members here in Las Vegas, as well as those in Carson City and anyone watching or listening over the internet. If you have not done so already, please mute all of your electronic devices. Persons wishing to testify today, please sign in at the table by the door. Before beginning to testify, please present a business card to the committee secretary and state your name clearly for the record. Today, we will have presentations by the Nevada Department of Taxation, Eric Severson from National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, and Chris Adams from Polco, Inc. We will also get a revenue collection update from our fabulous staff. I'll go ahead and move to agenda item number 3. I would now like to open the meeting for public comment. I would ask that comments be limited to 3 minutes per person. And if you are watching online and wish to call in this morning, the telephone number is 888-475-4499. Once again, that's 888-475-4499. You have to provide the meeting ID number, which is 810-2495-0317, and then press pound. And then when prompted for the participant ID, go ahead, also press pound. With that, we will go ahead and accept public comment here in Las Vegas. Is there anyone in Las Vegas wishing to give public comment? We'll go ahead and move up to Carson City. Is there anyone in Carson City this morning wishing to give public comment? Last but not least, BPS, is there anyone on the phone line wishing to provide public comment?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, but there are no callers to provide comment at this time.
Thank you so much. We'll go ahead and close public comment and go ahead and move on to agenda item 4, which is a presentation and status reports from the Nevada Department of Taxation. Director Hughes, welcome to the committee. I believe you're up in Carson City, so when you get a moment, go ahead and make it to the dais. I'm assuming you have lots of other guests with you today, so we welcome everyone who may be participating with Department of Tax up in Carson City as well as here in Las Vegas. Please feel free to commence your presentation when you are ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Shelley Hughes, Executive Director for the Department of Taxation. We thank you for allowing us to present here today. I have here with me today several members of Taxation's executive team. They are listed on the slide. Are you able to see the slides? So I will have each one of them introduce themselves as we get to their portion of the presentation. So we have a lot to discuss today, so I'll get started. Most of you are familiar with the Department of Taxation, but I thought I would give a brief overview of the department. The department provides a variety of functions, including administering 21 different tax types, including 3 fees, appraising property, establishing guidelines for local governments and ensuring compliance with those guidelines, reviewing local government budgets, and certifying annual populations. The Department of Taxation is comprised of 6 divisions, which consists of the Executive Division, Administrative Services Division, Information Technology Division, Excise and Local Government Services Division, Compliance Division, and our Boards and Commissions and Local Government Finance Division. We currently have 413 positions within these 6 divisions. The department's employees also staff 5 boards and commissions. The department is one of the main revenue collecting agencies in the state, and we collect over 70% of the total unrestricted general fund revenue. In addition to the state general fund, the department also distributes revenue to sources including the state education fund and local governments. For fiscal year 2023, we collected and distributed over $9.9 billion in state and local government revenue. We have 3 public offices, one in Carson City, one in Reno, and one in Las Vegas. And we do have a call center with staff located both in the north and the south to assist taxpayers. We are in our first phase of our modernization project, which we call Project Mint, or Modernize Your Nevada Tax, and we will be discussing that project later on in the presentation. And lastly, as I mentioned previously, we have 413 full-time equivalents with a 15% vacancy rate. So here is our agenda for our presentation. We will be discussing the status of the implementation of bills that were passed in the 82nd session. We will talk about some tax revenue statistics, including the uncollected or delinquent amounts from each tax type, our collection rate, and amnesty amounts from 2020. We will be discussing updates from the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement. We will discuss refund statistics from the National Guard sales tax holiday. We will provide you with an update regarding Project Mint and our other modernization activities. We will discuss how artificial intelligence relates to the department's modernization efforts. And lastly, we'll talk about what risks and opportunities we see for the 2025 session. So now I'll turn it over to Deputy Director Mitchell to discuss the next slide.
Thank you and good morning. Jeff Mitchell, Deputy Director for Excise and Local Government Services with the Department of Taxation for the record. As mentioned, I will be giving status reports on various legislation that was passed during the most recent period. The first one I would like to talk about is Assembly Bill 232, which we refer to as the premium cigars. This passed and became effective on July 1st, 2023. It added a definition for premium cigars and then changed the tax rate for those cigars. The rate that was passed changed from a straight 30% of the wholesale price to a rate of 30% of the wholesale price, except that the tax collected is capped at a floor of 30 cents per cigar and capped at a ceiling of 50 cents per cigar. To help implement this change, the department modified its forms and instructions, reached out to industry in order to accommodate this change. The current financial effect through March of 2024, which is our most recent statistics of AB 232, is estimated at a negative $3.5 million, with a projected estimated effect for all at FY 2024 of negative $4.7 million. Some things to take into consideration with these numbers is that could be a slight overstatement of the actual revenue reduction, as there was various changes to the amount of deductions that could be taken against the OTP in general for the sales of cigars and the tax collected. As the amount of the premium cigars was not tracked previously, there could also be an increase in sales of premium cigars, and so various effects could be taken into consideration with those numbers. Lastly, the amendatory provisions of the bill expired by limitation on June 30th, 2027. The next legislation that I would like to talk about is AB 430, the wholesale cannabis tax. This revised the excise tax on the wholesale sale of cannabis to apply either to the fair market value at wholesale if the sale was made to an affiliate, or to the actual sales price. The financial effect of this bill is a negative $5.85 million as of March 2024, with an estimated total effect for all of FY24 of negative 11.7 million. Do note that this is for 6 months of data, as the effective date of this bill was January 1st, 2024. The next legislation that I would like to talk about is AB 448. This deals with the real property transfer tax. Existing law currently provides for the imposition of taxes on transfers of real property, as well as existing law also provides that certain transfers are exempt from such taxes, including without limitation transfers between certain affiliated business entities. This bill provided that this exemption does not apply if a transfer of real property is made to a business entity that was formed for the purpose of evading the tax on transfers of real property. The department, to help implement this bill, is engaged in the regulation process with language currently being worked on to provide guidance to the county recorders on how to administer this exemption. As the bill was in effect upon passage and approval, currently there is an affidavit being requested for Exemption 1 that requests that the parties involved test that the business entity subject to the transfer was not created for the purpose of avoiding the real property transfer tax. The affidavit also requests other information to help support the claim for this exemption. The financial effect of AB 448 is not measurable currently. Lastly, I would like to talk about Senate Bill 1 of the special session. Senate Bill 1 created a sports entertainment district to allocate certain taxes to the support of a construction of a stadium. As the effects of the bill of this bill on the department are mainly distribution-based, we have worked to get a head start on the design requirements for different forms and distributions. We've developed revised tax forms to help us identify and work with the various taxes and to make sure that we allocate appropriately. Some of the work of the timeline is still pending, interlocal agreements, as well as the actual formation of the district. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Chief Deputy Yvonne Navarez-Goodson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Yvonne Navarez-Goodson. I am Chief Deputy Executive Director for the Department of Taxation, and I would like to walk the committee through various statistics. So on this slide, we present two separate charts that represent the amount of uncollected or delinquent debt through March 2024 based on tax type and the trends in accounts receivable over the last 4 years. The total amount of uncollected taxes and fees is approximately $464 million. Although you will see a spike in March of 2022, followed by a significant decrease for March of 2023, this is a result of fraudulent accounts discovered in the system totaling approximately $362 million and does not reflect actual business trends. On the next slide, we represent our current collection rate, showing the difference between the amount of taxes due versus the amount collected. Most recently, during March 2024, we saw taxes due in the amount of approximately $2.5 billion, and we collected approximately $2.45 billion, or a 98% collection rate for that month. You'll also see in this chart the trend in collection rate over time. On our next slide, we provide some breakdowns of our accounts receivable. The first chart on the left provides a breakdown between tax, penalty, and interest, with taxes showing approximately $266 million, penalties in the amount of $59.5 million, and interest in the amount of $150 million. The second chart on the right provides a breakdown of the age of the debt. 54% is debt over 2 years old, 11% is less than 2 years, 9% at less than 1 year, 15% at less than 6 months, and 11% at less than 3 months. Anything over 120 days is typically more difficult for the department to collect, but it is easier between 30 to 90 days. We also provide some statistics regarding the status of the debt for taxes administered by the current tax system. Under the current tax system, known as TAS, approximately $311 million is in the petition phase, which is 65% of the total accounts receivable. Approximately 17.4 million is in payment plans, about 4% of the total accounts receivable. Approximately 8.1 million is in bankruptcy, 2% of the total AR. Approximately $288 million has liens or withholds, which accounts for approximately 61% of the accounts receivable. Approximately $11.9 million is in an offer in compromise or settlement amount. Approximately $12.1 million is assigned to outside collections with the Controller's Office, which accounts for about 3% of the total accounts receivable. And finally, on our next slide, I'd like to provide some statistics regarding the amnesty program established by Senate Bill 3 of the 31st Special Session in 2020. By way of history, Section 10 of SB 3 from the 31st Special Session required the Department of Taxation to establish an amnesty program pursuant to which a person who was delinquent in the payment of a tax fee or assessment could pay the amount due without any penalty or interest in certain circumstances. The total tax amnesty payments under this bill were approximately $28 million, and the penalty and interest waived amounted to approximately $12.9 million. Of the amount collected, the following percentages by tax type were applicable. Approximately 60% of sales and use tax, 20% of modified business tax, 9% of business use tax, 7% of wholesale cannabis tax, 2% of commerce tax, and then 2% of our other taxes combined. And with that, Madam Chair, I will turn over to, to Director Hughes. Thank you.
It's Shelley Hughes for the record. I am going to talk a little bit about streamlined sales and use tax. Wanted to give a brief update. Nevada became a full member state of Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board on April 1st, 2008. The Governing Board created the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement, which is often referred to SUTA, to simplify and modernize the administration of sales and use tax laws of the member states in order to facilitate multi-state tax administration and reduce the burden of compliance for taxpayers. SUTA provides many benefits to taxpayers in member states. It minimizes costs and administrative burdens on retailers that collect sales tax, particularly retailers operating in multiple states. It encourages remote sellers selling over the internet and by mail order to collect tax on sales to customers living in streamlined membered states. It levels the playing field so that local brick and mortar stores or remote sellers operate under the same rules. And it ensures that all retailers can conduct their business in a fair and level competitive environment. SUTA also provides disclosed practices addressing how a member state administers its sales and use tax, economic nexus, remote seller, and marketplace facilitator statutes. The United States Supreme Court ruled in South Dakota v. Wayfair on June 21st, 2018, that states can require remote sellers to collect and remit the applicable sales and use tax on sales delivered to locations within their state, regardless of whether the seller has physical presence in the state. After Wayfair, SUTA provided disclosed practices as general guidance to assist sellers and marketplace facilitators in determining their sales and use tax registration, collection, and remittance responsibilities in each member state. To date, 24 states have adopted the measure in SUTA. Taxation has 3 delegates on the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board. Senator Neal is one of those delegates. I am one of those delegates, and Chris Carrillo, our department audit manager, is also a delegate. Mr. Carrillo is in the audience at Grant Sawyer today. Currently, the department is working on our annual recertification for compliance with SUTA. With that process, we have to provide a recertification letter, a certificate of compliance, and a taxability matrix, which is due August 1st of each year. For other updates, the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board meeting was held in Omaha, Nebraska on May 15th and 16th. The Governing Board considered various amendments to SUTA and the taxability matrix. Some of those amendments included revising SUTA, while other amendments included adopting disclosed practices or best practices on the taxability matrix. All amendments require 2 votes, but states can waive the second vote requirement. I thought I would go through a few of those amendments that were considered. One of the areas that was considered was the time when registration was required for remote sellers. The Governing Board approved a motion to amend the taxability matrix with the best practice of the state and that is that it does not require a remote seller to register and begin collecting or remitting the tax sooner than the first date of the first calendar month that begins 30 days after meeting or exceeding the state's threshold. Nevada already follows this best practice under NAC 372.856, Section 3B. And so Nevada really has nothing to do in regards to their statutes, to revise our statutes to comply with this best practice. The next item that was considered was registration and collection requirements for remote sellers. The governing board approved a motion to amend the taxability matrix. The amendment adds the best practice that the state's remote seller monetary economic nexus threshold is based on gross sales, gross revenue, or gross receipts from all sales. Nevada, however, determines its economic nexus threshold from gross receipts from retail sales only. If we decide to follow best practices, though it's not required we do, we would need to amend our statute. Another area that was considered is digital goods sourcing. A motion was made to amend Section 306 of SUDA to address sourcing transactions, in particular transactions involving digital goods, when complete street address information is not needed to transfer or deliver products to customers. For those of you not familiar with sourcing, tax is due where the product is transferred or delivered. So this amendment would include language in SUDA that if the seller does not request the complete street address, including the 5-digit zip code or 9-digit zip code, a member state is not required to relieve the seller from any additional liability that may be due as a result of incorrect sourcing. This motion was approved by the governing board, but a second vote is required. Currently, this amendment would not apply to Nevada because we do not tax digital goods. The governing board also approved amendments to Section 305, 308, 309, and 310 of SUDA that also refer to sourcing transactions, and these amendments will also require a second vote. The elimination of the transactional economic nexus threshold was another area of the governing board that the governing board considered. The governing board adopted the disclosed practice whether a taxpayer can cancel its registration if it only met the transactional threshold and the state has eliminated the transactional threshold. Nevada has not changed its statute to eliminate the transactional economic nexus threshold, so this does not apply. Some other discussion items were state and local tax rates and whether a state can have more than one state rate. This was deferred for another vote in October. And then the last discussion item where no vote was taken was attendance at trade shows and how the state will treat a remote seller who participates in a trade show. Stay tuned to hear more about those two items in the future. I will now turn it over to Deputy Director Roebuck to discuss the National Guard sales tax holiday.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Jennifer Roebuck, and I serve as the Deputy Director over the department's Compliance Division, which includes the Audit, Collections, and Tax Services sections. I'll be discussing this morning the Nevada National Guard sales tax holiday changes that resulted from SB 50 last session. Here's a brief history of how SB 50 came about. In 2008, Nevada became a full member of the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax, and as we know, if a member state is found to be out of compliance with any provision in the agreement, the member state can be sanctioned and risk losing the status as a member state. In 2021, NRS 372, 7281, and 7282 created a sales tax holiday to provide the exemption during Nevada Day weekends for eligible Guard members and qualifying relatives. The Nevada Day sales tax holiday provision expires in the year 2031. As a result of this law, Nevada was found to be in violation of the Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Agreement, Section 322. In order to come back into compliance, the department introduced Senate Bill 50 last session. SB 50 changed the language so that rather than the participants providing the exemption letter to retailers during the holiday, participants would provide their receipts to the department for a refund of the tax. Last year, the department facilitated the refund process for the 2023 Nevada Day holiday, and in January 2024, we completed the refunds. Here's the previous language showing the exemption letter requirement of retailers. You can see that prior to SB 50, every retailer was required to retain a copy of the exemption letter to support not charging sales tax to the individual. SB 50 changed the language of the law so that the Department of Taxation reimburses the participant for sales tax that they paid to Nevada retailers during the exemption period. To implement this new procedure, our staff worked diligently to ensure the requests were reviewed and refunded timely. Our tax examiners received and verified each of the requests. Our processors registered each participant into the department's system. Accounting posted the negative return, which generated the credit in our system. Then the credit was forwarded to the controller's office to be issued and mailed. Because the sales tax to be refunded was paid to the retailers in October, we had to wait until Nevada's October tax returns were due to be filed at the end of November before we could begin to process the refunds. The first batch of refunds were sent to the controller's office on December 11th, and the final batch was sent in mid-January. So here we have some of the basic statistics. We issued 196 checks in less than 6 weeks, totaling almost $360,000. The range of check amounts was from $11.72 and over $13,000. Of the refund requests received, just a few were not approved for the full refund requested, so the participants did a great job in getting the completed information to the department. For the first year of doing these refunds, we had 13 staff members directly involved. In 2023, we believe only about 10% of the service members participated, but we fully expect that number to increase in the coming years. We do need to rely upon the service branches to reach eligible service members, so we will be continuing to work with them to improve that outreach. That concludes my section. I believe Mr. Starr is next for us.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. For the record, my name is Patrick Starr. I serve as the Enterprise Project Manager for the Department of Taxation. As you are aware, Project Mint is underway, and I'm really excited to share some information with you about that this morning. Project Mint stands for Modernize Your Nevada Tax. It's our modernization effort. It is the portion of implementation for 3 years that we're implementing this new software. We have we've been approved for $52.4 million for this implementation. $42.7 million of that is funded by ARPA. The project was initially funded in 2019, but it was stayed due to COVID in 2020. In 2021, the department received funding for the continuation of the project. We hired in 2022 4 FTE positions and began the process. And by 2023, the Mint team developed and released our RFP. We went through vendor selection. We were approved by BOE in October, and then our vendor began in December of 2023. We have been ongoing now for 7 months. There are currently 3 phased rollouts for Project Mint. Phase 1 will release December 9th of 2024. This will include sales and use tax, consumer use, liquor, cigarette, other tobacco products, live entertainment, real property transfer, license and permits, and civil fines and penalties. It'll be followed up by Phase 2, which will be released December 8th of 2025. This is where we'll begin our local government services portion of the project. So centrally assessed property and unitary, net proceeds of minerals, the modified business tax, commerce, insurance premium, gold and silver, government fees, short-term lesser government fees, peer-to-peer car sharing will be released in Phase 2. And then in Phase 3, we'll finalize the project with the remaining taxes, which will be the tire fee, exhibition facility fee, transportation connection, wholesale cannabis, lodging, bank excise, centrally assessed property, and mining valuations. Project Mint has currently hit some major milestones. I'd like to share some of those with you. First and foremost, we had vendor onboarding occur in December with our vendor partners. Project management sessions began shortly thereafter and are recurring. We meet multiple times within a week to make sure that our project is ongoing and in good, healthy standing. The software rollout of the core system. The core system is the commercial off-the-shelf product. That is known as GenTax. That's what we have purchased. The modification of that software is what is known as Mint and will be My Nevada Tax moving forward. We did release our UAT environments. That's our user acceptance testing environments. That's a huge milestone for us. And then we began our system design sessions. And those have actually recently finalized, which is really exciting because we're a little bit ahead of the game on this one. So we're actually able to jump into our testing and training phase of implementation. So we are definitely on time, we're on budget, and that's exciting news. So to further press into being on time and on budget, Project Mint has also met 17 of the 89 deliverables. This is a huge task and effort by the Project Mint team, including the vendor side, to meet those milestones and meet those deliverables. We were very clear in our RFP and very strict on what we needed delivered for the state of Nevada. So we are currently scoping the rest of those deliverables now, and as time goes on and over the next 3 years, those will be hit at different phases and times, and we can be happy to share that with you if you're interested. All projects run into risks, so we don't want to shy away from this information. It is important that we share it with you. It's our response and how we look at risk and how we mitigate them. So this slide just goes over some of the current risks that we've identified and our mitigation and our response. These will persist through the project in some way, fashion, or form. New ones will arise. We meet twice a week on this within the team. To mitigate that, we report up to the executive board on the team to make sure that we're responding to these appropriately. One of the key things that I wanted to bring up about risks is it's not just looking at a problem and then mitigating it, it's forward thinking. We are very forward thinking in our process here at Taxation. Our ability to look at that and see the opportunities that come from risk is critical. So we like to look at our opportunities more than what the actual problems are, and that will help us mitigate those risks throughout time. One of the major opportunities that are coming up, obviously, is the legislative session. And I'm looking at this as a huge opportunity for the legislatures and the Department of Taxation to come together and strategic plan around things like our new tax types that may be coming around. And we want to be careful in this space because, obviously, with an implementation of this magnitude, we need to be very careful in how we strategize what system new tax types may fall into. So we want to just bring that forward, and I'm actually looking forward to working with everyone about how we can implement that and mitigate those risks up front. The department is also undergoing other modernizations. This is also critical to the development of Project Mint. We have taken on new offices within the agency. We are developing and establishing the Office of Project Management to help us mitigate and move through all of the projects and make sure that we're on time and on budget throughout the agency. We have an Office of Organizational Change. This is helping transition the mindset of our staff from the old to the new. This is where our training and all of our efforts take place there. And that's being established. And then we have our Office of Information Security to make sure that everything that we do, that we're making sure that our federal taxpayer information doesn't get lost in the way, that we're being extremely critical of how we deal with personal identifiable information and things of that nature. So those are the top 3 things for the agency currently. There are some other modernization efforts and initiatives that are underway. These changes are helping us actually grow within our maturity model. One of which is our mailroom optimization and modernization effort there. This is what's going to feed Project Mint and get the information from paper documentation, taxpayer information, and get that into the system as a work item that can be processed. We have our new our IT initiatives, like our server hardware help desk solutions that we're undergoing. We have new programs, ideas, which is a platform for change management and project management to come together and help develop leaders within the agency. At the Department of Taxation, we believe that developing leadership is critical to the success of the agency and the product that we're developing, and our effort there will help leaders develop more leaders and put us in a good positive space. We have project intake processes that we're developing. We have project assignments that are going on. And lastly, one of the big initiatives is KPI metrics and dashboard modeling, so that we will continue assessing and looking at the health of the agency long term, so that we can make sure and identify hiccups along the way and put measures in place to course correct. So that's exciting news. And that's what I have currently on this. I'm going to pass it over to Deputy Director Bernardi.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Joe Bernardi. I'm the Deputy Director for Information Technology for the department. I want to talk about start by giving you guys a brief overview of how we're partnering with other state agencies as well as sister agencies from other states on the topic of artificial intelligence. From a statewide perspective, the state has a State Technology Governance Committee, which consists of IT leadership from all the different agencies and departments within the state. From that, there's a subcommittee that is the State of Nevada AI and Emerging Technologies Working Group. I serve on that along with a few other members of the State Technology Governance Committee. On that committee, our goal is to deliver high-level guidance around the usage of AI statewide. The mission of the AI Working Group is to guide the state of Nevada through the evolving landscape of artificial intelligence. As a central advisory body, we are committed to developing comprehensive strategies that harness AI's potential to enhance public service, efficiency, and innovation. Our goals are to identify opportunities, establish best practices, facilitate collaboration, and advise on AI governance. Through these efforts, the AI Working Group aims to position Nevada as a leader in the ethical and strategic use of artificial intelligence, driving innovation and excellence in public administration. From a state, broader other states level, we are a member of the Federation of Tax Administrators, of which I think all 50 states are, as well as some cities like Philadelphia, Washington, D.C. So big group, they did an FTI working group, AI working group. It was a limited time collaborative opportunity for technology and business unit leaders within FTA membership to engage, learn, and report on the fast-moving trend of AI in tax administration. We had members of both the IT technology groups as well as business groups attend these meetings. There were two different sets. One set was a speaker series, which was mostly informative. It was 60-minute meetings to present different areas of AI and how different entities are seeing its use adopted. The second set of series is a working session, and that goal is to co-author and publish a briefing paper to FTA membership. This will generate a report that will include education, opportunities, and considerations for states to digest as they proceed through this process of AI. From a department level standpoint, you've heard us talk about our modernization initiatives, and part of that is we're implementing our e-services in a new platform, which is going live in December, and that will include a chatbot that's going to have machine learning as part of that. And the goal of that is to consume the data and then provide better, quicker, more accurate responses to the taxpayers online so that they don't have to engage our call center. They can get their better responses, better answers more quickly and accurately. So that's the goal. That's the expected outcome of that one. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Patrick Starr to discuss how we're using AI and natural language processing to improve our taxpayer correspondence.
Good morning. Thank you. Once again, Patrick Starr for the record. This one's really exciting. In preparation for Project Mint, the Department of Taxation sent a few of us to other agencies, other state agencies. And one of our findings when we went was that going into a modernization effort, these agencies took on what they were calling the plain language effort, which was where they took their forms and any correspondence and items that were being sent to the public and the taxpayers, and they rewrote them from a collegiate level to right around that 8th grade reading level to make it easier on their constituency. So we came back and we heard that. We took their lead on that and we put together this effort. And then the team, we were sitting around, the project management team were looking at the time and effort that it was going to take us to go through our 600 plus forms and correspondence to make this happen. And one of the ideas that came out of that is if we were to use Copilot, which is one of the AI platforms. So we ran a test, we ran one of the forms through that, and it rewrote it and got it down to a 10th grade reading level, which was really exciting. So we basically just started working through the system and how it was learning, and we're able to get it down to that 8th grade level. So now we're able to actually pass these through in record time. It takes about a minute for the system to read these. It does not stop the agency from having to actually review what the system has done. So we still have to go through that step, but it's actually saving the agency time, effort, money. So it's allowing us to be fiscally responsible. We don't have to worry about hiring any additional staff to help us take on this effort and whatnot. So our goal, again, is to get it down to that 8th grade reading level, and then will help us get a more readable document out to our taxpayers. There's still the parts in there where we need to have the statute and the administrative code that are in these letters and correspondence, so that remains. However, the ask to the taxpayer is very clear and easily understood. And with that, I will pass this to Chief Deputy Navarez-Goodson.
Thank you again for the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson. In wrapping up most of our presentation, we wanted to provide the committee with some risks and opportunities that we see coming into the next legislative session. While the department does not currently have any recommendations for new legislation, at the request of the committee, we wanted to point out certain risks that we foresee in the upcoming legislative session. In 2025, we will have only implemented the first phase of our modernization project, which includes sales and use tax, our liquor tax, and our other tobacco products. However, if there is legislation for another tax type, we will have some impacts in our current tax system with our forms and with our taxpayers. Depending on the legislation, we may have to implement the new legislation twice, once in our current system and then again in the new system. This will include different sets of forms depending on what system we are in and how the taxpayer will complete and submit those forms. This could result in additional costs to implement the changes twice. If the effective date of the implementation is after the tax type is in our new system, it could also result in lost revenue depending on when the implementation takes effect. Accordingly, timing will be crucial here to determine whether the additional costs outweigh the potential revenue during the time in which we are in between systems. And that's the primary risk we foresee just given our modernization efforts at this time. But we also have some opportunities, and with that, for the positive, I'm going to turn it back over to Director Hughes.
Yes, Shelley Hughes for the record. So along with those risks, we do see opportunities. With our modernization, we will have the ability to adapt to new tax types or changes to current tax types quicker and less costly than in our current system. We also see an opportunity for cost savings in our correspondence with our taxpayers. If we have statutes in place to allow for it, taxpayers can opt in to receive correspondence by electronic mail. They can sign documents electronically, and this saves on postage, paper, and staff resources. And it also brings the department up to current times. So we also wanted to provide the committee with a list of our offices and contact information for the department. We have some exciting news to share today regarding our website. We are launching our new website on June 24th, so if you all could take a moment to check it out. I think it looks fantastic, so I hope you do too. We believe it is more user-friendly and it provides more information for our taxpayers. And so that concludes our presentation for today, and we are available for any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Hughes, and your team for such a comprehensive presentation and a lot of great materials. With that, I'm going to open up to questions from the members of the committee. Let me start with Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I have a couple of questions, and I don't know if the first one is narrow or wide, but back on slide 13, you're talking about uncollected delinquent accounts, and there was a mention of fraudulent accounts, and I don't know what that means and what that encompasses, if I can get some additional information on that.
Thank you. For the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson. Due to taxpayer confidentiality, we wouldn't necessarily identify the taxpayer at issue, but what we learned as we were looking at our old system is that there had been one or more taxpayers that had indicated that they had paid tax or had tax due. And so it triggered a deficiency in the system worth about $360 million. And then when we caught it, of course, we had to reduce course. So it wasn't an actual taxpayer in the state of Nevada. It was not a tax due. It was just a fraudulent account that we learned was on our account.
Sorry, just to follow up. So does that mean that somebody accidentally filed something, or that it could have been somebody who filed a fraudulent business or something?
Thank you again for the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Considine. I think that the fraud indicates that there was an intent to misrepresent a payment in the system, and that's why it was caught. The amount obviously triggered concern from the perspective of our staff, and when we looked at the account, we realized it was a fraudulently included taxpayer.
Thank you. And then I didn't catch when you were talking about this earlier, did you have a number of accounts?
Madam Chair, I'm going to phone a friend here and refer to Deputy Roebuck, who has more information on this particular issue.
Good morning. Jennifer Roebuck for the record. We did identify one account. Based on the information that was put onto that account, it was very obvious that it was a fraudulent account. It appeared that, just based on how it looked, it appeared that perhaps whoever this was attempting to set up a liability in the account and then possibly try to request a refund of some sort, but there was never a payment to be refunded. There was no possibility of a refund to occur. That was just based on what we were looking at. So we're thinking that perhaps whoever this was may have thought that this was like an income tax state where you could do kind of like a refund on a payment that was never actually in there. But we were able to identify it and get rid of the account.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that explanation. And then my second question is, when we were talking about artificial intelligence, I'm wondering about the security of the data. I know that AI works by keeping all of the data about the questions, and that's how they can expand, and typically keeping information. The only way to keep that information safe is to do a closed system. So is there discussions or plans on that to ensure that if a person is in the chat bot or something, any information that they provide that would be considered confidential, doesn't go outside of the chatbot area or anything along those lines.
For the record, Joe Bernardi, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblywoman Considine. Twofold answer to your question. We are very cognizant of PII and getting that, making sure that that doesn't make its way into artificial intelligence systems. From the e-services chatbot side of the house, that is strictly going to be an internal system. So it won't be, there's no risk of it being released into the public. The project that Mr. Starr talked about getting our forms to a more readable level, that is strictly public information that we're feeding into a open AI system. So there's nothing confidential or personal at all going into that.
Thank you. Appreciate that information.
Next, we'll go to Assemblyman Orlichter.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of questions about the uncollected. So I'm glad that our collection rate is so high. You indicated that the longer the duration time has passed since the tax was due, the likelihood of collection drops. So do you have an estimate of, so my first question of two is, do you have an estimate of the $464 million that you think you'll collect? Do you make estimates?
For the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, through you, Madam Chair, to Assemblyman Orntlichter. We do not currently have estimates for that data in terms of what we think we'll collect. Again, it's contingent upon a lot of issues, whether or not the collection is in the petition process, whether or not those accounts are subject to bankruptcy or receivership. The age of the debt sometimes makes it more difficult to collect, and whether or not we have responsible persons who we can attach liens or withholds to. So there are a lot of criteria that impact our ability to collect debt that gets older.
Okay. And second, I imagine there are a lot of different strategies you can use to try to collect overdue taxes, and it'd be nice to make sure you have all the tools in your toolbox. Are there some tools that other departments in other states have that the legislature hasn't given you, and that you'd love if we would give you those tools to improve your ability to collect?
Again, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson, for the record. I'm smiling because that is such a great question, but I am going to maybe defer to our Compliance Deputy, Jennifer Roebuck.
Jennifer Roebuck, for the record. There's always going to be amazing opportunities for new and enhanced collection efforts. I think, first of all, having staffing with a little less turnover, hopefully, would be fantastic, because we could have more consistent staff who are more attentive to each of these accounts. I would like to follow up on the fraudulent account situation as well. We already had measures in place to catch these. The reason it came up in that audit was it was more of a timing issue, where it appeared on the controller's records, where it was basically we were already handling it. So there was more of a timing issue on that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Possibly getting some more vehicles would be helpful as well, so that we could have more of a presence out in the field. That would be helpful as well. I know that we have some great opportunities with our new system that we're still exploring and learning about. And we're hopeful that that's going to be working. And then as we go to some conferences to work with other states, we can find other opportunities that maybe we hadn't thought about, and also kind of see where we're already pretty strong.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Senator Ganser. I'll go to you.
Thank you. I couldn't figure out where the chat button was, or the hand button. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about the modernization of the mailroom. because you're updating all the software, and are you trying to move everything electronic? Because it seems like taxpayers should be able to get whatever bills or forms they need to fill out electronically, be able to fill them out online and submit payments electronically. And so, just kind of the question about the mailroom, whether we truly need a mailroom or that should be downscaled or reduced to make sure we move everything to electronic transactions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Senator Gansert. This is a great question, and thank you. Over time, our mailroom will downsize just by the nature of modernization and going to a more electronic platform. At this time, however, we're in that transitional period. So for the next 3 years and potentially into the next few years after, when we're in our first couple of years of maintenance, we're going to have to strategize what that model looks like. We ultimately, over time, what we're seeing from other states is their adoption rate of their new tax platforms and having the availability of those tax forms online. Migration is just natural. If you think about when online banking came around, at first it was kind of awkward going to your computer to do that. Now we're doing it on our phones. It's going to be very similar within taxation and in My Nevada Tax once it's released. That adoption rate over time will increase, therefore minimizing the need for the mailroom. However, currently we need to have in the mailroom optimization, we need to bring that process forward. We had made the efforts to move it forward prior. We had to place that on hold as we didn't have a platform to put that information into. Now that Mint is here, we can continue that effort. So the scanning process for forms that do come in will happen up front. There'll be some key data entry that needs to take place. There's a review of that information before it gets into the actual system to ensure that we're always operating off of good, clean data for the state.
Okay, and just to sort of continue along the lines of electronic processing, as far as what your goals are, because in my mind, the goal would be to move to fully electronic and have a mobile app too, something that makes it really easy for people. Because in the financial sector, everything is moving electronically, and there's something called FedNow, where the Federal Reserve is going to be able to allow payments and receipt of money in real time. And I think we need to make sure that we're looking towards what the future is and not just trying to update systems that we traditionally have had and use paper processing.
Absolutely. For the record, Patrick Starr, once again, thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to Senator Gansert. Absolutely. The interesting thing about Project Mint is that it is scalable. So currently, when we release on December 9th of this year, those tax types in phase 1, you will be able to use those and file your form through your phone. The platform is built to scale from handheld device to a computer to whatever device it is that you're using. It is also adaptable for the future. Project Mint is not a platform that is intended like past platforms where once you have installed it, it's no longer able to be updated, or that it's an on-premise solution. Therefore, it takes a Herculean effort to update. This process moving forward is actually, because it's commercial and it's off the shelf, Gentax or the fast enterprises that services the software are continually making updates iteratively. We're part of that process. Part of our RFP actually was about our updates and how we're going to receive those. So it's really about strategizing the future and looking at when we want to accept updates versus the cost that's going to be behind that. That's going to be part of our maintenance package.
I appreciate that information. I think the state is typically gotten behind on software, then we have to pay huge amounts of money to get to get current. And given that many platforms are cloud-based and there's the ability to update, it's not a static, it's a dynamic process when you buy software anymore. I just want to make sure the state is going that direction instead of sort of the static approach that we've had in the past. So I appreciate those answers. I'm very hopeful that you can move to electronic filing and rethink even your paper process or what those forms look like to make sure it's transparent and easily understood by the user to help with our collections. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions up in Carson City or? Okay, with that, I'll move to my questions and maybe circle back if anyone else may have any questions. Happy to take those. If I may direct you back to slide 13 regarding the uncollected and delinquent tax revenue. First, I wanted to confirm for that $463.8 million. That is the total amount outstanding. And my first question on that would be if there's a situation where debts are wiped away through bankruptcy, are those then removed from the books and no longer included in that $463 million figure?
Madam Chair, again for the record, Yvonne Navarez-Goodson. If I may, our economist is down in Las Vegas with you, Erica Scott. If we could bring her up to the dais, that would be great. And she probably is best to answer this particular question.
Good morning, Chair. Erica Scott, for the record, economist with the Department of Taxation. I actually rely on our distributions team who prepares the AR report. There are detailed notes in the report that goes to LCB, so I don't want to misspeak and answer that question. Can we get that answer later and supply you with that?
Absolutely, and I never want to put people on the spot, so that is perfect. And then my next question may apply to you and may require follow-up because it is on those outstanding collection items, specifically looking at the other tobacco products tax. It looks like there is little under 56.7 million that remains outstanding and due. And we just thought it was quite unique that it was so high that it actually exceeds the annual amount that is collected each year. And so I was hoping to get a little more information about why that may be. And if that's something also that you need to circle back on, I'm okay with that too.
Thank you, Chair. Erica Scott, for the record. I'm going to pull up that AR table that I have just to see if I can answer that more quickly, but it may be the same answer. Yes, if I could get back to you on that answer as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure if you need any assistance, our fiscal staff kind of knows what we were kind of inquiring about. So happy to help out if you have any further questions, what we were kind of looking for. But thank you for being here today. My next question pertains to, let's go to slide 18, and this would be a question for, I believe, Director Hughes with respect to the streamlined sales and use tax. I was just curious a little more in depth and on the one recommendation of an update was item number 2 under recent updates regarding the registration and collection requirements for remote sellers. And as I understood your testimony that right now Nevada law is different, and it didn't sound like there was any mandates to make Nevada law change, but I just wanted to understand, one, if that premise is correct and what that difference may look like from what we have in existence as compared to what the streamlined sales and use tax was providing as a recent update.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Shelley Hughes for the record. So my understanding, what you're asking is the governing board approved the best practice for the state's remote seller monetary economic nexus threshold to be based on gross sales, gross revenue or gross receipts from all sales, where Nevada, we determine our economic nexus threshold from gross receipts from retail sales only. And as you mentioned, that this was just a recommendation or best practice. We don't necessarily need to follow it. The question becomes, why would we want to amend to the best practices that SUDA recommends? It would align us with more states, and it would be simple for a taxpayer to follow those best practices because more of the states align with that same requirement. However, it could also be more complex for a taxpayer to figure out. When you were reporting your gross revenue or gross receipts from all sales, you were reporting those sales that are also non-taxable or exempt. So Nevada, the way we do it is on retail sales, and those retail sales defined as all sales other than sales for resale. And Nevada presumes all gross receipts are subject to tax until the contrary is established. So a taxpayer can look at just their retail sales and determine whether or not they meet that threshold. I believe that Nevada's statute makes it more simplistic for a remote seller from another state to know whether or not they have an obligation to register and file with Nevada. However, if they are adding up all their taxable sale or all their sales and coming up with a gross receipts amount for other states, that may just be a way to align with other states and make it simple for taxpayers. I guess it's more of a question for you all to determine if that's something you'd like to pursue.
I appreciate your candidness, but I was also, thank you for explaining that it was for best practices only, and it wasn't something that we would have to make sure we had to modify right away to be in compliance. So thank you for that response. The next question I have pertains to slide 22, and this was for the National Guard sales tax holiday. Understood that there were 196 refund checks, but it sounded like there was a mention that some of the refunds were denied, and I was kind of curious why that occurred and what was kind of the number that we'd be looking at for those that were denied.
Thank you for the question, Chair Backus. This is Jennifer Roebuck for the record. Very good question. Number-wise of the requests that were received, maybe 5 were denied in part. There were a couple that were denied in whole. The primary reason was it wasn't Nevada sales tax that was paid. It may have been paid in another state, like a neighboring state, for example. So that tax would not qualify for a refund. Another question that came up is just 1 or 2 maybe was the timing, and because of the way the law was written, they have to be within 30 days of the sale during that weekend, and that could actually be, that deadline could be a couple of days off. So, but I don't believe we had any that actually were concerned for that particular deadline. I think we received maybe 1 or 2 that were really late, and then they just withdrew it rather than pursue it. So we're hoping for better success next year.
Thank you so much. And also, just listening to the timeline is obviously you have to wait till we actually collect the tax before it is refunded. Was those that were participating in the program, was there a lot of negative feedback, or was that like a non-issue? Did people understand that they had to wait a bit to get their refund for the taxpayer to pay the tax, and then obviously for it then to be reimbursed to the taxpayer?
Thank you, Jennifer Roebuck again. The only, there really was no negative feedback other than perhaps there was a little bit of confusion on who actually qualified for the refund as a qualifying relative who resides in the same household or dwelling as the service member. So that could get a little questionable at times, just depending. So, but there was maybe one or two concerns about that. We really didn't have other negative feedback. But again, it's one of those things that we're going to be working harder on here very shortly because we're getting closer to that the Nevada Day holiday to make sure that we're reaching out to get more participation.
And then my next line of question will go into the modernization project, but this may be a question for you, though, before we go on to that, is with the new Mint project, are we hoping that that would hopefully help speed up those refunds?
Jennifer Roebuck for the record. I just asked my staff about that very question because our cutover is, I believe, December 9th, I think. And that does fall right in that time period when we're trying to process these. So the answer that came back was they're still trying to work through that. We're hoping it's not going to be disruptive, but naturally it could be. So we're hoping that even if it is a little bit disruptive, that it's not going to delay processing. Those are a priority for us when it comes to refunds. So any refund would be subject to the same possible problems that could come up, but we're working really hard to identify areas where things could be go a little sideways, and I think that we've got a pretty good handle on it. I'm hoping, though, that this will enable us to process it more quickly because we'll have the Surface members already in our system, so maybe they'll be able to file it electronically if that's what they choose to do. Currently, or as of last year, we were allowing them to email us to a special email inbox or to mail it to us or bring it in, whichever is easiest for them. So fingers crossed that that we don't run into any problems, but I think ultimately it will work more smoothly for us.
Thank you so much for that. I'm hopeful that will be the case. And then my question does turn to the Project Mint inquiry, probably to Mr. Starr, is one thing that was said that was crucial, and it's something I'm always cognizant of, potentially probably due to my time serving on growth and infrastructure and understanding when we implement policy as a legislature, that it always seems to impact like software and mandating updates. And so one thing that was said there, it seemed like there would be this specific time period. And I guess it may be hard to do because we're doing different rollouts. It looks like there's 3 distinct rollouts for Project Mint, where we would have to rely on both the old and the new. And it's hard to ask, but I guess I'm looking to see, other than at the end of the entire implementation, is it possible that when policy's implemented, if Project Mint has already gone online for like phase 1, then phase 1's up and running, and we're not going to have to be on the 2 parallel systems. I'm trying to understand that timeline, what that would look like with the implementation of any new policy that may impact existing, maybe like tax collection, whatever it may be. I'm just kind of looking to see if you have any idea of what we're looking at for time period.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Patrick Starr for the record. These are great questions and insights. There's the unfortunate part where we are when we're modernizing because of how we had to structure the phased rollout. So we look at our C-taxes being up front in phase 1, and then our next biggest tax being MBT being in phase 2. There will be part of our taxpayers may have to file in the 2 separate systems. We're currently looking at ways to mitigate that and make it easier on the taxpayer. It's not our intent to make this more difficult. We are currently looking at the creation, and this is just a byproduct of how we have to do this, of a creation of a middleware that will for the time during this implementation, that software, the new software will be there, and then we'll have a piece of software that speaks to the legacy system and then back. So like credits and debits will be tracked in that way. We'll be able to help the taxpayer navigate through both systems during that time. When we look at things moving forward and the initiation of a new tax type, if it falls within a sales and use type of a framework, phase one happens, then we can quickly adapt that in the new system. But if we're looking at something that follows more of the structure of, say, like an MBT type tax or something, or one of those phase two or phase three taxes, then we need to actually consider what that development time and that resource plan is going to have to look like, because that may mean that we're going to develop something in the legacy system, then have to develop the communication path in that middleware, and then also develop it in the new. And the unfortunate part about developing in the legacy and that middleware is we would assign those resources to do that. And then at the end of the 3 years, that gets shut off. So it's a very quick turnaround. So we have to look at our ROI on that development time and what the risk to the project is. If I take a resource off of the new and apply it to that middleware or that legacy system development, that puts us at risk of our timeline and being on time and on budget for the new.
I'm always a big fan of on time and on budget when it comes to our state's technological rollouts. But just so I understand, Claire, I just want to make sure, going back. So when development phase one rollout, which is on time and anticipated to be by December 9th, 2024, for the sales and use, that's going to be completely on the new system, and you're not going to have to do the parallel systems once that first development goes online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Patrick Starr for the record. That's absolutely true. So any of our phase one tax types, once they are in the new system, they will be shut off in the legacy system. So the taxpayer won't go into TAS, the current legacy system, and have to file any sort of sales and use tax there. It will be all in the new system. So it's where those crossovers happen, where if they're used to currently filing their sales and use and their MBT together, then we'll have to make a separation at that point and say, okay, file these sales and use in the new system, file MBT in the old system. And that's just an unfortunate byproduct of how the development process has to work here.
Thank you so much. And then my next question will move on to artificial intelligence, just especially the focus specifically would be on the e-services chatbot. And it's funny because yesterday I was on a software chatbot myself, and the response that I was getting was clearly not what I was needing. There was a breakdown in the software, and that's what I was trying to communicate, and instead it kept trying to tell me how to use the software. But thinking of this, the sensitivity is actually the payment of taxes. If a taxpayer goes on and is getting advice from e-service chatbot and maybe it is incorrect, and it creates a situation where there is an error in the tax payers reporting, and maybe they underpay their obligation in reliance of the e-service chatbot. Usually when you underpay, you're hit with penalties and interest. What's kind of the plan in that situation? Would the taxpayer have those errors, would the taxpayer have those penalties and interest waived because it was an error in the e-service chatbot? Are there going to be, I just want to know what that's going to look like.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Patrick Starr for the record. Currently, the way the chatbot is set up and how this is going to work, this is more navigation through the system to get to the areas that the taxpayer would need to get to find the information that they're looking for to file their taxes. So part of that structure currently is we have established a team, a triage team that's going to help the system. They meet regularly. In fact, it was just last week that we formed the team. They will be meeting once a week moving forward. Their the estimated time for about 4 to 5 people is going to be 40 hours a week between all of them. And as the system, this chatbot learns what is important, then they will go on the back end and they will help nurture the chatbot so that the taxpayer is getting the absolute correct information at all times. There's obviously hit and miss throughout that, and will never be 100%, but the goal is to be in the upper 90s for sure. As far as your concern is if the chatbot does put somebody into a position where then they are late, that is a conversation that we need to have and we would need to mitigate still. Sure.
Jennifer Robeck, for the record. I could fill in a little bit of the blank there. We do have a regulation concerning our waiver of penalty and or interest for late payment, and the regulation does say that if there's erroneous written information provided to the taxpayer or the taxpayer's agent by the department, then we would be able to consider a waiver of the penalty and or interest. But I have to say that based on what our intent is, I'm going to be optimistic and say it'll be unlikely that that would occur with our chatbot, but hopefully that's still the case.
And then also, just wanted to clarify one thing, like a part of this chatbot, I mean, do you anticipate, because I know we were curious about it being, it's going to be just purely an internal system. I'm just kind of thinking, I know there's a lot of like provisions when we're doing communications electronically, not sharing financial information. I guess there's going to be a lot of protections being put in place by what's being communicated into the chatbot regarding financial information of the sort. And I guess that's also going to be something we're going to be experiencing with the new Mint programming as well. I take it there's another layer that we're doing to ensure security of all of this information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Patrick Starr once again. That is absolutely correct. The system will not allow, we'll have restrictions on certain areas for what information can actually be input into the system. So for instance, with that chatbot, we wouldn't allow, say, a social security number to go into that. It would just be a rejection. It wouldn't be captured on our side. So the protection of taxpayer data is absolutely critical. Now within the system itself, there are layers of security that will occur so that we will identify taxpayers to be correct taxpayers for accounts, that they would have access and rights and privileges set up so that they are paying on the right accounts at the right time for the right taxes.
Thank you for that. And my last question, and then I'll go back to my committee members to see if anyone else has any further questions, is back to the premium cigars. I know that we had the deficit from just overall from the other tobacco product tax, but taking a look now that that has been separated out, the cigar tax, I take it over the next few years until that I guess, modification to the amount of wholesale tax paid on premium cigars would expire, we'll be able to see, now that that's separated out, whether or not the amount that's being paid is increasing or decreasing over the next several years, I think until it expires in 2027.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jeff Mitchell for the record. Yes.
Thank you. You got the easy question, I guess. Thank you so much. With that, members, do we have any other questions that may want to be posed to our Department of Tax? Doesn't look like it. With that, thank you all, Director Hughes and each of your deputy directors and deputies for your presentation today. It was very enlightful and very helpful. Thank you so much. With that, we will go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 5, which is going to be a presentation on the overview and discussion of the digital advertising tax legislation and litigation in the state of Maryland by Eric Severson from NCSL. And I believe Mr. Severson is on Zoom. So please feel free, oh good, and we can also see your presentation. Please feel free to commence when you are ready.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Eric Severson. I'm a Senior Policy Specialist with this NCSL's Fiscal Affair team, and it's a pleasure to be in front of you once again. Today, like the chair said, I've been asked to brief you all on the legal developments surrounding the various lawsuits challenging the state of Maryland's digital advertising tax. I would like to first start by discussing the tax policy in question, however, just to familiarize ourselves with what we're discussing here today. So if we go back to February of 2021, the Maryland Legislature officially enacted the Maryland Digital Advertising Services Tax, which after a successful veto override became law. Then Governor Larry Hogan mainly cited legal concerns for his veto. However, the legislature originally passed the bill with a veto-proof majority and then passed the bill over the veto. The tax itself in question is a graduated gross revenues tax applicable to companies with an annual global gross revenue derived from digital advertising services above $100 million. The tax applies to the portion of global revenues derived from digital advertising services in the state itself. The tax rate ranges, as you can see, from 2.5% at the lowest tier to 10% for companies with digital advertising revenues above $15 billion. The Maryland legislators had subsequently amended the tax to prohibit companies from passing the cost of the tax onto consumers who purchase digital advertising services in Maryland. In addition, the state has exempted news media and broadcast entities from being subject to the tax. The implementation of the tax was delayed until the 2022 tax year, and the state originally estimated the tax could raise up to $250 million annually to help pay for a newly adopted K-12 education funding formula. As of April of last year, however, the state raised $107 million in tax revenue, and that is coming from 74 individual taxpayers, and the state itself has issued only $14.5 million in refunds. When the tax was originally enacted, the Attorney General's office issued a review letter arguing that the digital advertising tax was constitutional and met legal sufficiency. However, the letter did raise provisions that signaled potential legal challenges to the tax, which are as follows: preemption under the Federal Internet Tax Freedom Act, or the ITFA, a potential violation of the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and a potential violation of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. These flag constitutional questions foreshadow the legal challenges that the digital advertising industry would use to file lawsuits against the Maryland tax policy. Quickly, representatives of technology and entertainment firms have challenged the tax before it was officially implemented. Initially, 2 separate lawsuits were filed in both the federal and state court challenging the legality of the tax, and I think it's helpful to think about these 2 challenges on the separate tax. So let's start first with the federal lawsuits. 4 business groups originally sought a declaration and an injunction from a Maryland federal district court against the enforcement of the tax immediately after it was enacted. In March of 2022, a federal court dismissed the majority of the original lawsuit, ruling instead that the Federal Tax Injunction Act bars a challenge to the tax because Maryland state courts have provided a plain, speedy, and efficient remedy to challenging the tax through the administrative procedure set up through the Maryland Comptroller's Office. The remaining issue in the case was whether the provision prohibiting the tax from being passed on to consumers violated the First Amendment as opposed to merely regulating conduct. The plaintiffs in the case, with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce being the lead, appealed the decision to the Fourth Circuit of Appeals at the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. In January of this year, 2024, the Fourth Circuit finally issued its ruling. It agreed with the lower court ruling and dismissed 3 challenges that were brought against the tax under the Internet Tax Freedom Act, the Commerce Clause, and Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution. It argued that federal courts cannot prevent the collection of state taxes when there is an adequate remedy. It is important to note that the Fourth Circuit the court dismissed these challenges without prejudice, disagreeing with the lower federal court's dismissal with prejudice. That's significant, I would like to point out, because those challenges, that means it could be raised in another legal venue in the future. Crucially, the Fourth Circuit directed the lower federal court to consider a legal challenge to the tax on First Amendment grounds. In particular, the complaint alleges that the pass-through provision of the law, which prohibits tax companies from passing on the cost of the tax to their advertising customers by, quote, means of separate fee, surcharge, or line item, end quote, violates the First Amendment as content-based regulation of speech. The appellants have argued that the act was designed to punish a select group of technology companies as well. Ultimately, I would expect another lower court ruling and most likely another appellate court ruling following the Fourth Circuit's January ruling. It's possible that this case could change venue and move to state courts as well. Speaking of which, let's switch gears a little bit to state courts. Comcast and Verizon initially filed a lawsuit against the tax and to challenge the tax in state court in Maryland. They sought to have the tax declared illegal under the ITFA and also alleged the act violated the Commerce Clause, Due Process Clause, and the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. The state circuit court initially ruled that the litigation may proceed, saying the companies did not have to exhaust their administrative remedies before bringing such a case to state court. However, quickly, the Comptroller of Maryland argued that the state circuit court lacked jurisdiction because the plaintiffs had failed to exhaust their administrative remedies with the Comptroller's office first. In October of 2022, the State Circuit Court issued a ruling that the tax, 1, discriminates against companies providing digital advertising services in violation of the ITFA, 2, targets out-of-state companies and interstate commerce by using worldwide gross revenues to calculate the tax, and 3, singles out certain companies for selective taxation in a way that is not content neutral. After the ruling, the Maryland Comptroller's Office requested for the Maryland Supreme Court to review the case. And on May 9th of last year, 2023, the Supreme Court issued a rule vacating the original State Circuit Court's order. The ruling did not address the merits of the arguments concerning the validity of the tax itself. Instead, it ruled that the State Circuit Court lacked jurisdiction over the case in the first place, agreeing with the Comptroller that the appellees failed to exhaust their administrative remedies. Now, crucially, it's key to understand that aggrieved taxpayers can challenge a state tax by first paying the tax in the state of Maryland, then seeking either a refund from the Comptroller's office or appealing the assessment of the tax from the Comptroller's office. Only after this process plays out can the Comptroller's final decision be challenged in Maryland tax court. Since the Maryland Supreme Court order did not address the uncertainty concerning legal issues undergirding the tax itself, for now the tax is in effect. The Maryland Comptroller issued updated guidance immediately after the state Supreme Court's ruling to reflect the order. Since the Maryland Supreme Court ruling, 18 prominent technology and entertainment companies have petitioned for refunds through the administrative remedies I just talked about. That includes Apple, Peacock, along with Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, just to name a few. Like these previous challenges, these companies desire to stop the enforcement of the tax and to rule it illegal based on several common arguments. For instance, Peacock asked the court to find the digital advertising tax in violation of the ITFA and the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Peacock has also argued it violates the First and 14th Amendments because it singles out taxpayers for differential taxation. In addition, Peacock has also asked the court to rule it violates the federal and state constitutions' due process clauses because it taxes beyond states' boundaries. The complaint argues that the Maryland's tax is, quote, a quintessential discriminatory tax, end quote, because it, quote, applies solely to electronic commerce, end quote. While digital forms of advertising are taxed, the complaint says, quote, non-digital forms of advertising such as billboards, magazines, newspapers, and other printed media are not, quote, in the state of Maryland. According to a more recent Bloomberg Law article reviewing these cases, the state tax court has set dates for multiple complaints lodged against the digital advertising tax. Although the court will hear from the complaintees separately, starting first with Apple and Peacock, it has announced that a single decision applicable to all 4 of these complaints was what we should expect. The court has already heard from Apple and Peacock, and they will hear from Google next week on June 27th, and from Meta or Facebook on August 8th. Whatever the outcome, the tax court ruling will most assuredly be appealed, setting the stage for another ruling made by the Maryland Supreme Court. What's more, if it ends up there, there's also a strong chance that this case finds its way eventually to the U.S. Supreme Court. Considering the pending legal action at the federal and state levels, plus the anticipated appeals process in both jurisdictions, I think it's fair to say we should have to wait a while for a definitive ruling on this tax in both jurisdictions. States considering a digital advertising tax now face a choice. They can either move forward with implementing their own digital advertising taxes, despite these taxes not yet undergoing a thorough law review, or they can wait for future litigation to see if it upholds or overturns Maryland's tax. Now, just to end on a little bit of a state policy note, while most states are eagerly looking at the legal action in Maryland, some state houses have actually been considering their own version of a digital advertising tax. For example, earlier this year, Nebraska proposed LB 388, which would enact a 7.5% excise tax on digital ads for companies with a combined gross advertising revenue of over $1 billion. Fiscal analysts in the state projected the measure would have raised $54 million in new revenue. This measure is considered to help offset property tax and income tax relief that the governor had proposed earlier in the session. The measure has not passed, and the governor hopes to call a special session to resolve multiple tax issues this summer. Likewise, California debated AB 2829, which would have opposed a 5% tax on annual gross revenues of a person or entity that offers digital advertising services in the state. The tax would apply to those with $100 million in global annual gross revenue, including revenues unrelated to digital advertising. The bill awaits a pending vote before the Assembly Committee on Revenue and Taxation. And finally, a state with an actual version of a digital advertising tax enacted is New Mexico. The New Mexico Department of Revenue issued updated regulations to clarify rules related to the application of their gross receipts tax to digital advertising services on websites accessible within the state. The rules specify that the 4.8% gross receipts tax now extends to digital advertising on platforms like search engines and banner ads, treating them similarly to print, billboard, and radio and television ads within the state. So I hope you found this overview very helpful. I know I just gave you a lot of information, so I'm happy to take your questions, any of which I cannot answer now. Would be happy to follow up with a written statement in the next few days, but thank you.
Thank you so much for that breakdown of a lot that had transpired. So we appreciate that. With respect to that, I will start with Assemblyman Orlichter.
Thank you for the presentation. So I like, from a perspective of withstanding the constitutional challenges, it seems like New Mexico's approach is the most promising, taking an existing tax and just applying it to these companies that, for whatever reason, weren't being brought in. Is that a strategy that most states, or in particular Nevada, could use? Are we likely to have a generic tax that we aren't applying but could sensibly apply? Do you know, or is that a question for our tax people?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Assemblyman. I would have to say, to be honest with you, I'm not a lawyer. This is not my area of expertise. I am a public policy professional and specialize in public finance. From my understanding of the legal arguments, a lot of the complaints lodged against these taxes have to do with differential taxation and selectively applying taxes through the internet, and that relates to the federal legislation of the Internet Tax Freedom Act, which is a substantial portion of the appellant's case. So I don't know what the best strategy is or what the best legal reasonable outcome. So I would definitely defer to your legal expertise in Nevada.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll go to Assemblyman Hafen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm going to have a number of questions, and some of them are going to be for fiscal, but I'm going to I want to dovetail after Dr. Ornlicker's questions. If I could, the first question would be just an example of what a digital advertiser is in comparison to some of the other companies. I think you mentioned Peacock as one.
Yes. Thank you. That is an example. I think it is any business, company, entity, person that offers advertising services that primarily take place online. So that can take the form of, like I said, banner ads that you see on URLs and HTML code that pops up whenever you're scrolling through, for example, an article. That can also take place in targeted ads on social media. So examples of these companies, like I said, are those who host HTML code and those who offer spots to advertise on their search engines or platforms. So, for example, Maryland had exempted broadcast and media entities, but those technically are defined as those who provide digital advertising services because they offer those services on their website. So anybody who makes revenues from selling online digital advertising space.
Thank you. And then, Madam Chair, if I may, I think this is probably going to be more for our staff, but just to clarify the current tax structure in Nevada with the commerce tax, are billboard companies, broadcast and media companies that are locally based in Nevada, companies like that were mentioned here today, Verizon, I think Comcast was mentioned, Cox Cable, DirecTV. All of those companies are currently subject to the commerce tax if they gross over $4 million, correct?
Madam Chair, Assemblyman Hafen, for the record, Michael Nakamoto with the Fiscal Analysis Division. Assemblyman Hafen, you are correct. The commerce tax does apply to businesses based on what is determined to be their Nevada gross revenue in excess of $4 million per tax year, which is the fiscal year. So to the extent that the revenue that they would receive from such activities would be attributable to Nevada and would be considered as Nevada gross revenue under the statutory definition, then yes, that would be subject to commerce tax at whatever the applicable rate for the business is.
Thank you for that. And then my follow-up to that, Madam Chair, if I may, is those companies, do we know if they are including digital advertising as part of their gross revenue in calculating the commerce tax, or do we not know how that's currently working? And the reason that I'm asking the question is I think everybody understands that I believe in fair taxation and that taxation should be equal across the board. And so I'm curious if we currently have some companies that are paying a digital advertising tax based on our commerce tax, and then others that are not paying that tax. And so that's where I'm trying to go with this question. And so I'm just curious if there's any way for us to know if those current companies, the media companies, the Cox Cables of the world, et cetera, are including digital advertising in their gross revenues.
Michael Nakamoto with the Fiscal Analysis Division for the record, and I don't know if there's anybody from the Department of Taxation who will be there to correct me or strangle me if I get this wrong, but my understanding is that the returns that are filed by entities to the Department of Taxation do not separately state where their gross revenue is generated or what activities would be subject to that they just report their gross revenue that is attributable to Nevada. So I do not believe that we would have any way to determine whether digital advertising or any specific activity that would be potentially considered gross revenue in Nevada, that we could separately identify those compared to any other activity that they may have.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the conversation.
You're welcome. Okay. Let me just look online. Any of our online participants have any questions? Okay. With that, Mr. Severson, I appreciate your time today. I believe that's all the questions we have. I'm kind of just looking around to make sure I got everything. But thank you so much for your informative presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
With that, we will go ahead and move on to our next presentation under agenda item 6, which is a presentation on the overview and discussion of programs relating to taxpayer transparency and education by Chris Adams from Polco, Inc. Mr. Adams, we welcome you to our committee. I see you already on the screen and online, so please feel free to begin when you are ready.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Chris Adams, and I am a strategist for Polko, which is a company that provides data and engagement tools for government, primarily local government, but increasingly so at the state level. Today, I'd like to share with you a version of a presentation that I gave last summer to the NCSL, and I believe Senator Neal was in attendance at that, and she had asked me about sharing this with more broadly with her colleagues in Nevada. So I'm delighted to be here to have that opportunity. I'm going to be talking about a couple of things today, primarily to talk about financial transparency and what I think are some of the most interesting ways to do that, most interesting and engaging. Transparency has been something that has been an expectation and even a given, I think, for a lot of governments in the U.S. We work a lot with the Government Finance Officers Association, so including cities and counties and school districts. States, I think, have been at the vanguard of that simply because of their size and the size of their constituency. But it's something that I think still could benefit from some significant improvements. So today I'll be talking to you about two things. One is providing a taxpayer receipt, so not just offering sort of a percentage of where tax dollars go, but actually providing something a little bit more personalized and more educational to residents, and a budget simulation that can let residents look at what state government is spending money on, and then provide some input on what should be some priorities, and then to also sync up on the tax side. So very relevant to the conversation that you've had previously today. In 2023, there are two states, Minnesota and Indiana, that passed laws requiring taxpayer receipts. The goal there was to simply better educate residents about what they're doing in a more engaging way. As I've been saying, financial transparency exists, but in some ways it's not getting value. Sometimes it's just done in such a way that it really doesn't connect with residents. And then I'll also be talking about some research and some evidence that is probably intuitive to many of us, that when taxpayers understand their government, when they have knowledge about government, that trust increases. And that's a very important thing, especially given the climate that we're in, where trust at all levels of government in the United States is falling. So I'm going to start with the basic transparency and just present to you sort of what some of the most prominent practices that we have now. And so I'm starting now with just a screenshot of the budget book for the state of Tennessee. This is the primary budget book for the year 23-24. And this particular book had, I think, about 4 appendices. In total, it was about 2,000 or 3,000 pages. And I just want to direct you to this one. This was page 1 of page 571. So you could clearly say that is transparent. It is sharing with residents what is in the budget, but it's in a way that is probably not very helpful. Very hard to wade through 571 pages just in the main book with all the appendices added on to that. It's just not something that's very accessible. The state of Tennessee also does something that's pretty cool, and I know that the state of Nevada does some version of this, where they present an interactive dashboard. And I think that that's also a wonderful thing. But it's also not that accessible or that understandable to a resident. And so if you look just a little bit more closely at this, I've highlighted the education expenditure for the state of Tennessee during this year, and it's at $14,668 million, which is also known as 14.7 billion. Those numbers are just inaccessible to most people. The human brain isn't really built to comprehend what those numbers actually mean. And to give you an example of that, this is a depiction of a person holding $10,000 in $100 bills. So it's pretty small, somewhat understandable. This is what $1 million looks like, so a little stack down by her feet. And this is what $1 billion looks for. It's just piles and piles and piles of $100 bills. And so in this example with the state of Tennessee and just what they spend on education alone, you would multiply that by almost 15, those stacks of $100 bills, to get a sense of what that actually looks like. And there's numerous studies that show that the human brain just really can't understand those types of numbers. And so what we've done then is we've created a taxpayer receipt. And I'm a founder of a company called Balancing Act, which was merged with Polko 2 years ago. And when we built our tools, one of our major subject matter experts helping us to design something that would be useful to government was the former state treasurer of the state of Colorado. And after we had gotten to one milestone with our budget simulation, which I'll show you later in this presentation. She said, the thing I'd really like to have is I'd like to have a way for residents to estimate how much they're paying in taxes. So not just to see a generalization of where tax dollars go, but to estimate how much they're paying themselves, and then to get a breakdown, something as simple as a taxpayer receipt, so that they can understand that. And the stories that she gave about that was that she would often be talking to citizen groups and business groups and neighborhood groups and so forth, and about the city budget. This was for the city of Denver. And she would ask, how much do you think that the city of Denver spends on snow removal each year? And for whatever reason, the numbers came in almost always around 200, which tells me that that's how much residents value that service. They thought it was worth about $200 of their tax dollars for Denver to remove snow from the streets. And then she'd get a big smile on her face and she'd say $12.50. How's that for a deal? And so it's a way to demonstrate what government is doing and to show that it's actually got high value and it's actually a pretty good deal for most residents. And so from that, we created a taxpayer receipt. It's meant to look like a grocery bill, but it's also got some interactive features, these blue info icons, so that people can dig in deeper and learn a little bit more. And so I wanted to show you one of those before, but I also want to show you just this revenue screen. This is a sample that I've created. It's based on state of Colorado information, but I've slightly altered it so that it reflects the city of Nevada, or the state of Nevada. So let me now go to an example of this, and I'm going to just show a sample. And this is what we call the revenue estimation screen. And so it says, would you like a receipt for your state of Nevada taxes? And I've clearly labeled this as a demo, and it's a URL that would be very hard for somebody to guess. And it says, answer a few questions to find out how much you paid. And so it asks for your income. I will just put in $50,000 as an estimate. And then it asks for your age, and I'm just going to put in 35. And then it asks, do you drive a car? And if you say yes, you are asked what type of fuel do you use? Is it gasoline, diesel, or electric? What's your car's average miles per gallon? I'll just put in 25. And then how many miles do you drive a year? I'll put in 10,000. And so what these are doing is we're estimating a couple of different types of taxes. So this top one is estimating sales tax. And so we use a lookup with the Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Expenditure Survey to say somebody who has $50,000 worth of income has X amount of disposable income. And then a 35-year-old, there's actually a breakdown of the types of goods that somebody buys at different ages, would buy a certain market basket of goods, some of which are sales taxable and some of which are not. And so the age is important there because a 35-year-old under most tax schemes would be buying more goods that have a sales tax that would be attached to them, whereas somebody in their 80s or 90s, a retired person, might be spending their money mostly on healthcare, which generally is not taxed or does not have a sales tax applied to it. So by having somebody's income and their age, we can come up with a pretty good estimate of how much they have to spend on sales taxable items, and then to multiply that times just the state portion of the income tax and come up with a good estimate for how much sales tax they pay that's available to the state. The second one is more straightforward. It's just asking, it's getting a sense of how much gas tax somebody pays. And so here's what happens when you put in those inputs. And by the way, this can be customized with whatever types of revenue sources you want. We found it's best if it's a transparency tool to keep it simple. This one just has 2. And so now you can say view your tax receipt. And what comes up is something that looks a lot like a grocery receipt, but it has items that state government pays for. So in this instance, for the person that we just talked about using Colorado's taxation rates, for schools, $732 would go to the schools. And you can go here and you can learn more about that. There's a description of it. Colleges and career training, $159. Healthcare, $504, and then it breaks it down by Medicaid, by indigent care, public health programs, et cetera. Transportation, this was a year that transportation actually didn't receive any funding, even from the sales tax. I'm not sure of the technical reason for that. And then you can just go down and sort of see all these different things, public safety, prisons, et cetera. And then you can go down here and see what the total amount raised from this person, the total amount paid by this person with their sales and gas tax, and click on this and get some priorities. And then you can go and check out the simulation next. So I'm going to show you the simulation quickly, and then if there are any questions or comments, I'd be glad to take those. All right, and this is sort of what the payoff is. I think, for public officials. This is a study that was done at MIT that was looking at a taxpayer receipt that was provided through the White House, I think in 2010. And what this study found was that by presenting a taxpayer receipt, which is an impartial breakdown of how income taxes are allocated, reduces politically polarized views regarding the legitimacy of taxes. So at a time when there's decreasing trust and decreasing sense that government is providing value, this can be a very useful way to sort of bring people together on the core services that states are providing. And then a second quote, this is from the United Kingdom. At one point, the United Kingdom actually provided a taxpayer receipt to all of its residents. And the major finding there was that it increased people's knowledge about what people did. So they don't curse the darkness and say, I just send my taxes to government and then I never see what happens from that. But this actually improves knowledge gain. And in my company, this is a study that was looking at public trust. And what they found is that when there is an increase in knowledge, that there's an increase in public trust, that there's a correlation with that. And there's a very strong correlation with overall confidence in government at 0.64. And there's also a similar correlation of increased knowledge with trust as represented by value of taxes paid. So we think that these are very promising and a good reason to believe that if you can find ways to educate people about what their taxes are going towards, that increases knowledge and that increases trust. The second thing I want to show you is a budget simulation, and I'm going to show you one that I worked on. So in addition to working for Polco, I also am a senior fellow at the University of Colorado School of Public Affairs. A couple of years ago, this was just before the pandemic started, this was January of 2020, we created a simulation for the state of Colorado that was based on the governor's proposed budget. So it is coming up as being balanced. But as you'll see, there are state programs down here, and you can open those up and you can interact with them. So if you look at the largest one, I think it's the largest one, K-12 education, you can learn what K-12 education is in Colorado. And you can learn that the per pupil funding is $6,952. You can click on this and you can get more information and you get a link to a joint budget committee report and you could put in graphics and so forth here if you wanted to. And if you wanted to interact with that item, you could simply open it up and you could see what the governor's proposing. So the governor was proposing restoring some cuts. So that's in the budget. But you could also look at his proposed expansion of the Colorado preschool program. And then if you wanted to increase it even more, this is the base funding that is going to education. You could say, I want to increase this. Education is important. I'd like to see more of that. But what you've done is you've then created a deficit for yourself. So in addition to showing the programs that the state of Colorado spends money on, you can also go over and take a look at the revenue side. And that's why when listening to this morning's presentations, as you're trying to identify possible revenue sources and increases, and some of them might include some taxation, this is a great way to illustrate to residents what their tax dollars are going towards, let them tell you a little bit about the level of service that they would like. And if they want to spend more money than is available, you can then let them go over here and increase some of those. And so if you wanted to increase the individual income tax, if you try to increase it, it tells you that the state of Colorado has what's called the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. And so that means that the legislature doesn't have the authority to increase taxes. So it has to be done by a vote of the people. So you can go ahead and see what that change would look like. So by increasing revenue just a little bit, a few clicks here, you can actually move yourself back into surplus, even with those increases that we've made to education. I've just got a couple more slides and then I'm going to stop. When we first started sharing this with state legislators, we thought that the most interesting thing would be the taxpayer receipt, because that's essentially a way for you to show constituents what you're doing with tax dollars. But what we found in talking to a number of legislatures, especially in the East, is that they feel as though there's a crisis in civics, a crisis in education of knowledge of what government does. And so I then added some things to my presentation about how this can be used in schools. And so one of our my favorite types of client is school districts. And so this is a school district in Colorado, and the school district was projecting a $15 million deficit. And so the superintendent and the school board created a version of our simulation. And then they had a large meeting with parents and other interested constituents. And then they put them into classrooms at a high school. And they had a teacher as a facilitator helping them walk through this to see what it would mean to close that $50 million deficit and let them decide if they wanted to do that through program cuts or if they wanted to do that through increasing the mill levy. And I think it was a year and a half later, they resoundingly decided that they wanted to increase taxes because they valued their education system that they were able to understand and see the budget of through the simulation. And then over here, another example in Syracuse, Illinois, Syracuse, New York, where people are teachers, school district members, board members, students are coming together to do the simulation and to help figure out what the best ways to allocate scarce financial resources. We've been delighted to have been recognized by PBS, by the NewsHour, and they actually have a lesson plan that I can share a link with you if you'd like, so that teachers can use this around the country. We have a version of our simulation that we do with the Bipartisan Policy Center in Washington for the federal budget, and PBS has created a curriculum for high schoolers to do it. We've had hundreds of thousands of high schoolers around the country use this in their civics class. And I'm going to stop there, but I would love to have questions or comments if any members of the committee have them.
Professor Adams, thank you so much. I do believe we have a few questions. Let me start with Vice Chair Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's very interesting, especially as you're talking about having this in schools for students who are statistically not well versed in financial literacy, much less civics, having both of these things come together. So I'm curious how this started, how this came about. I know in your presentation, it didn't start as education for schools, but I'm wondering, is Polco like an educational nonprofit? How does this come around? And also when you're talking about like the PBS partnership with the schools, are you pulling information from states and their data because it's public information and putting all of this together, or do you have to be working with the state in order to get their curriculum or all of this information together?
Sure. Thank you for all those questions, and I don't want to spend too much time on them. But I will tell you the reason that we started was that in Colorado, you may or may not be aware, Colorado has the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which essentially says that no tax rate increase can happen in the state without a vote of the people. So it essentially took that authority away from the legislature and the governor and put it in the hands of people like me. And we decided that we needed to give residents a chance to actually understand. I mean, not expecting them to have the expertise or the amount of time that anybody on this call would have to go through the budget, but to give them, if they're willing to give maybe 10 minutes or so, to give them an opportunity to understand the basic trade-offs that have to be made in every budget and the relationship of the government that they want and the service level they want with taxes. And we have some reason to believe, some adjacent evidence that says that yes, that when people have that opportunity, they feel better about their taxes, they understand government better, and they may actually be willing to support a tax increase if they know what it's going towards. So that was one answer to your question about why we did this. In terms of the how, we typically partner with, almost always we partner with the government entity itself. The federal government is a different animal. That's why we chose what we thought would be a trusted third-party content expert in Bipartisan Policy Center. We've had a couple of instances with some states. Wisconsin is the one that comes to mind immediately, where it was a sort of a government advocacy group or a good government group that wanted to do this because they saw it as part of their mission. But what we've seen is that it's by far, far, far the most effective when the government itself does that. We don't have a good example of a state doing it. States are just complicated animals. They have a large legislative body. The legislative body has its own professional staff. The executive, the governor has a professional staff. We would love to sort of pioneer this effort with you, and it could be something that would be done by a department. It could be something that would be done by the executive office, like the Office of Management and Budget, for example. I'm not sure if you have that. It very well could be done by the legislature. It's not terribly complicated, the data that goes into it. It's stuff that really is all public record. But we found that sort of a combination of us sharing our knowledge and expertise on public engagement and sort of what the public's able to take in, helping to identify what the public-facing trade-offs are, combining that with specific budget expertise, like I'm sure multiple people in the room right now have, probably a number of others too in state government, is really the best way to move forward. And did I answer all your questions? I'm sorry.
I believe so, but I've thought of another one.
Okay.
Sorry. So Nevada doesn't have an income tax. So a lot of our tax would come from sales and uses. So when you're looking at the questions where you're asking annual income, age, and driving of the car and gas, how accurate can it be? You know, what is your sort of range for accuracy in a state without an income tax? Is it kind of like I don't know, what is it?
So I don't think I can apply a number to it, but I can tell you. So when I made this version for this demonstration today, I basically took Colorado simulation and I took Colorado's taxpayer receipt and I removed the income tax portion. And I actually think for a state that is heavily reliant on sales tax, and I'm assuming it's because you have a number of visitors, a lot of visitors in Nevada, that this would look quite very high value to your residents because there is not an income tax. It's an estimate. The methodology was worked out by PhD economists to use the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we think that by entering your income and your age, and then taking the consumer expenditure survey, and then applying your the items that you tax and don't tax. It's like sometimes food and medicine is not taxed. Exempting those from the calculation, that it's pretty good. I don't think it's perfect, and we actually have economists on staff that could maybe come up with a better number if you wanted something very specific. But I can tell you it's a decent methodology as long as you say it's an estimate. And I think that in terms of the car, as long as somebody puts in decent information, if you know what your car mileage is and how much you drive, you can actually get a pretty good estimate there. But I would always say it's an estimate. It's not perfect, but I would also say that we've never had the methodology questioned. Well, we've had questions asked about it, but we've never had it doubted.
Thank you. And from that, I actually had some follow-up questions regarding that. So there's no margin of error. It's basically really an estimated tax receipt is what I'm understanding that you're kind of explaining to us.
Correct. Polko does do scientifically valid research, and where we do apply a margin of error to it. This is more meant as a public education tool. And in part because we want it to be simple enough so that somebody with just a few minutes can actually get some benefit from it.
And I guess I started overthinking that as well, because it is really simple when you have the few questions, but thinking about Nevada, and you highlighted it, I wasn't even thinking about it, is our sales tax, for example. We have a lot of people that come into our state and actually pay that. And then a lot of Nevada's income is also derived from our businesses and gaming, whereas as a resident, it's derived obviously from the amount of sales tax, but we also, if people own property, pay property tax. And I didn't know, I guess once something like this is implemented, there's maybe other categories that could be added, like household size, something like that, to see really what the span of sales tax may be hitting that family based on the income range, as well as maybe property. So I thought that was very intriguing. You can comment on it. I don't think it's really a question. I think I worked it out in my head.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think you're exactly right. You could make this as complicated as you want, but I think that the benefit is that if somebody's willing to spend 2 minutes or so or 3 minutes or so learning, that they actually get something that is meaningful to them, takes into account, broadly speaking, their circumstances, and then they can actually see a breakdown. I once did this with a room full of finance directors at the Colorado Government Finance Officers Association, and at first they were dreading it. They're like, "Oh, geez, do we really have to do this?" And then they went through it, and then afterwards, when they saw the value that they would be that residents would see when they did this, they kind of changed their posture and wow, this is actually kind of a good thing, and they thought it was sort of a positive thing for good governance. And by the way, we would work with your finance, whoever implemented this, whether it's the experts in the legislature. Excuse me, Madam Chair, may I continue?
I think you're going to answer the next question I was going to ask, so perfectly. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Is that we would work with you or whatever entity would implement it, whether or not it's your state budget director, legislative staff, one of the departments, Department of Revenue. It could really be lodged in any number of ways. There's another state that's actually thinking about lodging it in higher education because they have a government analytics department at one of their state universities. that we would come up with whatever revenue estimations you want. Like we've got methodologies for estimating property tax, we've got methodologies for estimating restaurant tax. You could really put in whatever you want, and we would sort of work with whatever entity was designated through legislation or whatever action to get precisely what Nevada wants, and to make sure that those numbers were as high quality as they could, realizing it would always just be an estimate.
And then I think on those inputs, likewise with the, what I would say would be like the portion of outputs with respect to what like is the budgetary items, that also requires consultation. Up and above that though, when programs like this are being implemented, like such, for example, in whether it's Colorado, Minnesota, or Indiana, is it, after it's implemented, is it heavily weighed on whether it's like we don't actually have an office of budget management, but for those states that do have those offices, does the office then take over and put in like all the data points? Is that what ends up happening over the years?
It could be in some instances, we would simply provide the software and customer support. In other instances, we might partner with you and we would sort of build it together. It could really be however you want it to be. It's not, we have a basic shell that works pretty well. And so it's not overly burdensome to put it together.
Thank you so much. I don't believe we have any other questions. I'm just kind of looking at everybody else. Mr. Adams, I do appreciate your time and your presentation today. So with that, we will go ahead and close agenda item 6, and we're going to move on to agenda item 7. The next agenda item includes a revenue collection update and is going to be presented by our own fiscal staff. And so, Mr. Nakamoto, hopefully I've given you enough time to make your way up to the dais. So feel free to begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was actually prepared for this. We got everything set up before the meeting, so I'm okay to jump into it. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I am Michael Nakamoto, Chief Principal Deputy Fiscal Analyst with the Fiscal Analysis Division of the Legislative Counsel Bureau. And this is the agenda item where we go through the monthly revenue updates based on the tables that you have seen before. And those are in your packet beginning on page 65. I've been joking with people that this is my normal Thursday routine right now, because this is the third time that I have presented these sets of tables this month, and they have all been on a Thursday. First at the Economic Forum, and then last Thursday at the Interim Finance Committee meeting. And keeping that in mind and recognizing that several of the members of this committee have heard this presentation before, I'll go through some information, and I'll throw in a little bit of different information that I've presented before, maybe just to keep it interesting. But recognizing that there are members of this committee who haven't possibly not heard this presentation before, I will still go through a lot of the information. So again, the tables that we do, tables 1 through 7, are in your packet beginning on page 65. Table 1, which is the one that is on the screen right now, is the comparison of the FY 2023 actual to the FY 2024 forecast before tax credits. So this is before any reductions of revenues for any of the tax credit programs that can be taken against the revenues. So this is the one where we've showed what the Economic Forum's forecast was for FY 23 and 24 from their May 1st, 2023 meeting. And then once the FY 23 actual is put in, how does that change the growth rate that's necessary to hit the forecast for FY 24? And so looking specifically at the pink columns, in the instances where that EF May 2023 FY forecast percentage change increased between the forecast and the actual, such as the sales and use tax. That meant that in FY 2023, that revenue source did not meet the forecast for the Economic Forum for FY 23, but where that number decreased, the examples of the percentage fee tax or the insurance premium tax are good examples. That means that the actual collections for FY 23 exceeded the Economic Forum's forecast for FY 23, and so as a result, the amount of revenue that is needed to grow to hit the forecast in FY 24 actually had to decrease. So the meat of my presentation today is going to be on Table 2, which is where the information is on how we're doing year to date. And as I've gone through these tables before, as I've noted, the reference period, how many months or quarters each tax has been collected, shows up next to that tax name. We have in the yellow column the year-to-date actual collections for FY23. In the peach or pink column, we have the year-to-date collections for FY24. And then in the green columns, that's where we take that fiscal year growth rate and we calculate a year-to-date forecast. And basically the assumption is that if every month or every quarter grows at that annual growth rate, then we would hit that forecast. So if the sales and use tax, for example, is supposed to grow by 7.1% over FY24, every month would have to grow by 7.1%. To meet the forecast. There are other ways that you can calculate this. This one assumes that the pattern of collections is the same this fiscal year as the last fiscal year. There are other ways you can do this, but for simplicity's sake, we chose this one as a way to determine this. So for the major general fund revenues, you can see in the gray line at the bottom there that we're approximately $127.6 million or 3.6% above the forecast. The highlights of this obviously are the sales and use tax, which is approximately $32 million or 2.3% below the forecast. Through 9 months. The gaming percentage fee tax, which is approximately $38.8 million or 4.5% above the forecast. And then going down, the one that everybody has seemingly been interested in, the live entertainment tax, which is segregated out between the gaming portion administered and collected by the Gaming Control Board, which through 10 months is approximately $1.2 million or 1.1% below the forecast. And then the non-gaming portion, which through 9 months is approximately very close to $46 million or 82% above the forecast. And the question is always going to be asked, and I will answer it before it gets asked again. That is that when we were developing forecasts for this, we knew of certain events that were going to occur, such as Formula One, the Super Bowl, and we had estimates for that activity. Whether we got close on those or not, there is kind of not so much the issue here as it is the kind of the things that we didn't really have a good handle on, such as the impact of the sphere and what events were going to be in that building, as well as just other events in general. We kind of have a good idea of things that are popping up. Because we see announcements, Taylor Swift announcing a tour, we will know about if it happens a few months in advance, but we wouldn't necessarily know, say, if Taylor Swift decided to come back and do another show, for example, at Allegiant Stadium. That's the kind of information we don't have because your major acts aren't typically announcing their tours 2 years out or like that. So this is one where it gets a little difficult for us to have really good information just because we know what is happening in terms of big events from based on the information that we see in the news or that we receive from other sources, but we don't know everything. So this is one where we obviously didn't quite have the information that we might have liked. So that's good for the state general fund and for this revenue source, but as forecasters, it's not the greatest thing to have to deal with. So that's kind of really what's driving the major general fund revenues. In terms of the select non-major general fund revenues, so that top block are the revenues that are actually, the forecasts are approved by the Economic Forum at their forecast meetings. The non-majors are approved by the Economic Forum based on recommendations made to them by the Technical Advisory Committee on Future State Revenues. We call them the minor or non-major general fund revenues. And so you can see with respect to those, we're fairly close to the forecast. We're approximately 1.4 million or 0.3% below the forecast through 9 months or 10 months or 3 quarters based on whatever is shown there. The governmental services tax we list on there, and you can see that at 0. This is something that we list on here only because there were collections in FY23 that went to the State General Fund. This is based on legislative action during the 2023 session, a revenue source that is now 100% dedicated to the State Highway Fund, and that is why the actual collections year to date for this revenue source are 0. It's not that the tax isn't being collected, rather it's just being distributed to the State Highway Fund. The big part that I want to spend probably a little more time on than usual, and I have for all of the other presentations, is in the all other general fund revenues, which are approximately 73.6 million or 31.8% above the forecast. And I've mentioned this before that the $73.6 million is largely driven by a couple of revenue sources, and specifically I'll identify 2. And the first one is interest income, which is approximately $66.8 million above the forecast through 2 quarters. At the time we put these revenue sources or these revenue tables together, we didn't have information on the 3rd quarter. If I were to add the 3rd quarter in here, would add probably about another $16 million to this number to bring it to about $83 million above the forecast. And our office has had conversations with the Treasurer's Office because this is basically the money that the Treasurer's Office earns on investing the balances that the state holds. And so we are, based on that information that Treasurer Conine and his staff provided to us at that meeting, it is a combination of interest rates being higher than we had anticipated back in May of 2023, along with balances that were far higher than we expected. And it's not just the federal ARPA money, which does make up a portion of it, but because revenue collections have been higher and because the state is holding on to a lot of money, we just have found that we are generating more interest than we expect. As the federal money is spent down, as the interest rates hopefully will decline at some point, and that's obviously based on federal actions by the Federal Reserve, we should see that number decreasing in terms of the impact that interest has on the State General Fund. But for now, it is making up a considerable amount of the revenue that we are above the forecast. The other piece of the all other revenue that is making up a fairly significant portion of the this surplus, so to speak, is in gaming penalties. And I've mentioned this at previous meetings that there was a $10 million fine paid by Steve Wynn to the Gaming Control Board very early in the fiscal year. This was something that we were not aware that was going to happen back in May of 2023, so we did not forecast for it. But as a result of those and other penalties and fines that have been levied by the Gaming Control Board, we're currently sitting at about $10.5 million above the forecast. So those two pieces together account for $77.3 million above the forecast. And so to get back to 73.6 $6 million above the forecast. We have what I'm going to call the all other, so it's everything else on the economic forum sheets that's not interest income or those gaming penalties, which are approximately $3.7 million below the forecast. So it's if the economic forum tables, and if you look at table 7, it's a representation of every single revenue source that goes into the state general fund. So once you take out all of the major general fund revenues and the select non-majors that we list on table 2, and then take out the gaming penalties and interest income, you have over 100 different revenue sources. When you take those and put those together, are approximately $3.7 million below the forecast. And I think the big portion of that are commissions that are generated from local sales tax rates that are retained by the Department of Taxation, or it's retained by the state general fund to compensate the Department of Taxation for the cost of collecting those taxes. When you put those together, those are about $2.6 million below the forecast, and that's probably making up the large amount of that. But then you have a lot of pluses and minuses around that get you to the minus $3.7 million. So this is kind of where we're sitting right now. Through the end of May, we're approximately $199.8 million, or 4.8% above the forecast. We're sitting now here on June 20th, and in about just under 2 weeks, we'll be able to update these tables again. We'll have another month of information from the Department of Taxation on the monthly revenues. We'll have information from the Gaming Control Board as well. And then all of the other revenues, we can go in and get updated information through the end of June, and we'll have updated tables. So to flow into that, I'll go to table 3 and spend a little time on table 3. And basically, table 3 is a representation of a comparison of the remainder of the fiscal year of what was actually collected in FY23 compared to what would need to be collected in FY24 to hit that forecast. And so it's laid out similarly. You can see the revenues all listed there, but the reference period is, in this instance, is how many periods are remaining to be collected. So for the sales and use tax, we have 3 months that are needing to be collected: April, May, and June. We'll receive April from the Department of Taxation, I'm guessing probably by the end of next week, so we'll have a good handle on that month here very shortly. But you can see that for the sales and use tax, for example, we collected $440.8 million for the last 3 months of FY23, which was a representation, or it was about 2.8% above what we collected for the last 3 months of FY22. To hit the forecast, though, what the Economic Forum approved at its forecast back on May 1st, 2023, for the last 3 months of FY24, we would have to collect just over $504 million, and it would represent approximately a 14.3% increase above those last 3 months in FY23. So it's a fairly heavy lift, at least for that tax. But there are some taxes, obviously, where the lift is not so heavy. The percentage fees tax, for example, we only have to collect $44.3 million, which is approximately, and this is just for the last month, the month that the Gaming Control Board reports. At the end of this month, which is the May activity period, is actually the last month for this tax for the fiscal year. But the $44.3 million, if that's what they reported, it would be $47.5 million, or 47.5% below the forecast, and we would hit the forecast for this fiscal year. So we're anticipating that we will be above the forecast this year. And so the ones that you can see, the one that obviously sticks out the most then is the live entertainment tax, where we could actually refund $27.4 million back to taxpayers, and we would still hit the forecast. So we've already made the forecast for the live entertainment tax, and that is kind of a representation, again, of how well that tax is performing. I don't expect that we're refunding $27.4 million, but we will exceed the forecast on that. So then when you get down to the bottom line, the absolute bottom, is that through the between the end of May and the end of FY23, we collected $1,578,000,000 thereabouts in FY23, which was 6% above the forecast or that same period in FY22. For that same period in this current fiscal year in FY24, we only have to collect right around $1,397,000,000, or an 11.4% decrease for us to hit the Economic Forum's total forecast before tax credits for the State General Fund in order to meet that forecast. So then the last tables, again, Madam Chair, are tables 4 and 5, which are basically, those are tables 1 and 2, but after tax credits that are allocated to specific revenues. And so what we do on these, as I've noted before, is that we balance those against, we make sure that the gross totals equal the net totals, because there are a number of the tax credit programs that can be used against multiple taxes, and so that the Economic Forum, when they do their forecast, they're only forecasting the total amount of credits that are taken for, say, let's use the film tax credits, for example, which can be taken against the modified business tax, the gaming percentage fee, or the insurance premium tax. But when the Economic Forum does their forecasts, they only do the forecasts for the total, how many film tax credits are going to be used, period, not how many are going to be used against the gaming percentage fee or the insurance premium tax or the modified business tax. Because we have that accounting issue going on, what we will do is we will balance those out, and then when we get to the end of the fiscal year, we can show how all of these all of these revenues and the tax credit programs performed in aggregate, rather than trying to do the calculations and have everything move through the end of the fiscal, or through the fiscal year. So when we get after the fiscal year closes in September, and then when we get to the Economic Forum meeting that is usually held in mid-October, we will make a presentation to that body with the full results of the State General Fund, both before and after tax credits. But we have this information here just to kind of show, and it's mostly in Table 6, where we actually go into the tax credits by tax type and by credit type and show how many have been taken. This is kind of more of an illustration to show how many tax credits are being used. And so then the last thing that I want to talk about then, Madam Chair, is on Table 7. Which is on page 77 of the packet. And this again is the comparison for FY23 and FY24 through May of all of the revenues in the State General Fund, not just the ones listed on tables 1 and 2. So that you can see basically what the comparison is. So for example, on page 77, if under the state gaming block, you can go down to GL 3042, which is gaming penalties. And so the yellow column shows the year-to-date collections through the end of May for FY23 of $321,549. And then the peach column is the FY24 collections through the end of May, so where you can see the $10,897,671, of which the $10 million was the fine that was collected early in the fiscal year from Steve Wynn. And so with that, Madam Chair, there was nothing else that I really wanted to go through on the tables for this agenda item today, but I will stand ready and available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A lot of us have had the pleasure, but it's always like you get to see it, the presentation, you always learn something each time. So that is worth every Thursday presentation this month. With that, I will start with Assemblywoman Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of questions. I think I know the answer to the first one. So going back to the live entertainment tax non-gaming, I know we had huge events. We had the Super Bowl, F1, Beyonce, Taylor Swift. There's no way, is there a way for us to know percentage-wise how each of those events contributed, or is that information, because the taxpayer is confidential, not readily available?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Assemblywoman Considine. Michael Nakamoto for the record. That is, the last statement you had will gauge pretty much what my answer is with the confidentiality provisions in statute, especially relating to the Department of Taxation and the Gaming Control Board. It is difficult for us to put together statistics on various events or facilities because it may identify individual taxpayers. One of the other complications to the question, because you were mentioning specific events, is that when we receive data, or when the Department of Taxation receives information on collections from the live entertainment tax, they receive it from specific taxpayers, and it's not necessarily tied to an event. So, for example, let's say Live Nation, which is one of the big concert promoters, if they're selling tickets for multiple events simultaneously, I don't believe that they're just representing the sales that they made and the taxes that were collected. They wouldn't necessarily identify specific events. If we did have individual taxpayer records, it might be possible for us to identify specific events based on timing or who the taxpayer is. But again, we as your nonpartisan staff, we are bound by the same confidentiality that exists in Chapter 360. So even though if we even were able to ascertain the information, we would be bound by those confidentiality statutes as well.
So essentially, we don't really know. We can guess, but we wouldn't really know if the Taylor Swift concert and everything around that had a bigger impact on our economy than F1.
Michael Nakamoto for the record. Assemblywoman Considine, I think the simple answer to that is yes. Because of a lot of the complications, I'm not sure that we would be able to say that any one event was more impactful, at least in terms of direct collections from the live entertainment tax, than another.
Thank you. And then my second question, when you're talking about tax credits, tax abatements, I know that some of our tax credits, for example, the film tax credits, those tax credits are available, but an entity can't really avail themselves of those tax credits until like a year or two down the road when they've finished everything. Is that correct? And if that is correct, then when you're considering the tax credits for the biennium or for any 1 year, are those actually used? Or I guess in the forecast, how, if you could give me a little bit more elucidation on that. Thank you.
Absolutely, Assemblywoman. Michael Nakamoto for the record. And I'll back up a little bit and just say, as part of the general thought or logic behind the tax credits, at least as it pertains to the Economic Forum, is that when you go and if I were to show you the Economic Forum forecast for the FY 23, 24, and 25. Basically, what we do is we list the forecasts for each of the individual revenue sources, and then when we get down to the bottom line, we have forecasts for the tax credits, which are shown as a negative number. And basically, that is the representation and the assumption that every dollar of tax credits that is used is one less dollar that is available for the legislature and the governor to spend as part of a budget, either whether it's the executive budget proposed by the governor or the legislatively approved budget that is approved at the end of every legislative session. So in ascertaining those forecasts, staff to the Economic Forum, and it's specifically our office, along with the governor's finance office, who are the staff. We will talk to the agencies who are administering each of these tax credit programs. So, for example, the film tax credits are administered by the film office, which is within GOED. And so Kim Spurgeon in that office, who is their current director, we'll contact her, and she's always very helpful, and I would be remiss if I didn't point that out, that all of these agencies are very helpful with their time and their efforts in this. But whether it's the film office or the housing division or GOED or the Department of Taxation or the state treasurer or anybody who's responsible for these, we basically have conversations with them about what are the programs that they're administering, how much activity are they seeing in those, and then they give us an idea based on the activity and the number of credits that they anticipate on issuing based on those that activity, what we should put as the forecast for the reduction in revenue based on those credits. And so to get back to the question that you asked, you are correct that there is a lag time. So, for example, let's say the film tax credits are a good example. They come in, they make their application, get a preliminary approval for an amount of credits based on what their estimates are for their qualifying activity for those credits. Then they actually have to go out and make the production. Then after that, and all the post-production and everything, they take their receipts and all of their audits and everything back to the film office, who then determines the full amount. And there is a time lag to that, and it could be as long as a year. But as soon as they receive that certificate that says they've earned this tax credits, it can be used or sold and then used by whoever makes it. But that's part of the exercise that our office, along with GFO, in working with these agencies, kind of tries to figure out. They have a good idea of what their pipeline is in terms of the projects or things that would spur that activity. And then it's up to us to determine, okay, how does that fit in with a timeline? Then we have to make an estimate on when those credits are actually spent. And I don't know if all of that answers your questions or whether they're follow-ups, but we'll see how I did.
Thank you so much. Let me look to Carson City and online. Members that are online are in Carson City. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Nakamoto? Okay. I just had a quick follow-up question with respect to the tax credits, because looking at the different policies that have been implemented over the years, it seems like if there's like a transferable tax credit, if there's policy that doesn't have like deadlines when it's going to be used, that is something else that you guys have to forecast, is trying to, and I hate to use the word guesstimate, but you're basically forecasting when those tax credits would be utilized. If there's never like an end date, it could be taken like a couple of years down the road. That's something you guys have to also take into contemplation.
Madam Chair, Michael Nakamoto for the record, that is absolutely correct. Working from memory, I believe we're fortunate that all of the tax credits do have an expiration date, that they have to be used within 3 or 5 years of issuance. It has been our experience, though, that in the period that we've had these tax credits, and we're at over a decade now since the first transferable tax credits were issued, that the purchaser of the tax credit has, or the holder of the tax credit, has every incentive to use them as quickly as possible. So if it's a larger tax credit, it may take them a while to use those credits. So, for example, back when Tesla received a number of transferable tax credits relating to the construction of their gigafactory up in Story County, they received significant amounts of transferable tax credits, which were then sold to a number of entities and used against the gaming percentage fee. And so The larger that entity is who purchases at them, they can go through them faster, but it's really going to depend on what the tax liability is for those. But we anticipate that because they are spending potentially considerable amounts of money to purchase these tax credits, that they will have every incentive on using them as quickly as possible. And then I'll also note, because we don't necessarily talk about it on these sheets for FY23, 24, and 25, we'll have a similar thing occur beginning in FY26, we anticipate, with the tax credits that are issued relating to the Major League Baseball stadium in Paradise on the Tropicana site. SB1 from the 35th special session did authorize an amount of transferable tax credits relating to that project of, memory serves me correctly, $36 million per year. In that range. So whoever purchases those credits, because presumably the developers of that project are going to sell the credits, because the revenues that would be generated from the project, according to SB1, will be used for the payment of bonds. So they don't have any taxes they can use them against. However, they will be able to sell them, and whoever purchases those will have to figure out what the timing on that will be. But I think our assumption is that as soon as those credits are earned, they're going to be sold and they're going to be used as quickly as possible, perhaps within the same fiscal year.
That's interesting. Thank you. I don't believe any of our other members have any questions. So I thank you so much for your presentation, and I'm sure if we want more, we can rewatch whether it's IFC or also the Economic Forum on the different presentations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And lastly, I will note, as your nonpartisan staff, we are available at any time. But I will just say that if there are any questions on this table, if you could wait until next Thursday, I would appreciate that, so I could make it 4 weeks in a row.
I like that. Thursday is our table forecasting day. With that, I appreciate your presentation. We'll go ahead and move on to agenda item 8, and this is public comment. I would like to now open the meeting for public comment. I don't believe we have anyone here in Las Vegas. Looks like Carson City is empty, but in case someone pops up and wants to walk to the table, they're more than welcome to do so. And last but not least, I will go ahead and turn it over to BPS. BPS, is there anyone on the phone line wishing to give public comment this afternoon?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working, but there are no callers to provide comment at this time.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. We will go ahead and move on to agenda item 9, which is adjournment. So committee members, that concludes our meeting for today. And I just wanted to remind everyone, our meeting in July has been vacated, and so our next meeting will be the one in August. So thank you, everyone, today, and we are now adjourned.
Thank you.